Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Really excited to be sharing projects using some of the just released stamps and wafer dies from Simon Says Stamp. I'll do a release and review video after this one. So this is the new Tulip background stamp from the Sunny Days Ahead release. And of course I had to use it. I just said in my previous video, I was like, I love tulips. Tulip stamps, the actual flowers, anything. If it's got a tulip on it, I want it. So I lined it up in my MISTI. I took the foam insert out of my MISTI. And then I have some Strathmore watercolor paper in my MISTI that I used my anti-static powder tool on, brushed off the excess, and then I am stamping this background with clear embossing ink. And I'm going to ink it up and stamp it twice, just because one, it's a very detailed stamp, and it's large. Plus I am stamping it on watercolor paper, which I generally will try and stamp on the smoother side of watercolor paper if there's an option for that. And then it just helps kind of pick up that extra bit of detail. So after I did the stamping, I am coating this with Ranger Liquid Platinum embossing powder. I honestly was like agonizing over which embossing powder to use because I have so many favorites. Normally my go-to would be white, and then I thought gold, and then I actually considered silver, which I almost never use. But then once I started thinking silver, I'm like, oh, but liquid platinum would look even better. So that's what I used. So coated it with the embossing powder. I'm going to melt this completely with my heat tool, tilting it back and forth to make sure everything is smooth and melted and I didn't leave any grainy areas. And then this little trick, I just watched a video by Yana Smakula. She does Yippee for Yana videos on the Simon Says Stamp channel. She has her own YouTube channel. If you don't follow her, she does just phenomenal cards. I love her cards. So she did a video and she showed how she flips over her MISTI and uses the back of it and then the magnet to hold projects to watercolor and whatnot. And I was like, that is brilliant. Like, such a good idea. And then she can carry it around, you know, and sit outside and all that kind of thing. And I'm like, that again, it's brilliant. I never would have even thought of doing something like this. So I did it. And I'm probably going to do it more because I really like that. So that's what I did. I'm working on the back of my MISTI. I have my magnet just holding this down. On other projects, it still helps, you know, if you're doing like even a background like this or just large watercolor pieces with lots of water, you still want to tape them down to a hardboard. I would never tape anything to the back of my MISTI because there's a good chance tape could end up like ripping the foam backing on your MISTI. But for things like this or just smaller projects, etc., using it in this way, I think is just brilliant. So I learned so many random little tricks from watching other people's card making videos, and I always try and give credit as often as possible because if you aren't watching them, definitely check them out. You know, Debbie Hughes and Yana Smakula and obviously Jennifer McGuire, Christina Werner. I could go on and on and on. But anyway, I kept the watercoloring technically simple. I've super sped this up. But all I was doing was adding clean water first. And then I'm using my Prima Classics watercolor palette. And for all the blooms, I just mixed the pink and orange. That's it. So I would just add clean water, pull in some of the pink and orange or mix them together, kind of dab it in, and then move it around with another watercolor brush. And I'm just working with my Royal and Langnickel Zen watercolor brushes, and I'm using size 4, which is kind of my go-to with this brand anyway. And I have 2 of them, one for the color and one for clean water. It just kind of makes it a little easier to get everything done. So I did all the blooms first, which again, I didn't time myself doing a big background like this. It didn't take as long as my last video, which was no line coloring, which took well over an hour. I think this maybe took me well under half an hour because I kept it pretty simple and I only did like the one layer. I didn't go back. And then after I did all the blooms, I went in and did all the greenery, which was just green and yellow and a tiny bit of blue mixed together, and that was it. So like I said, no extra layers or anything. And since everything is heat embossed, has the raised edges, I just threw in the color and didn't have to worry about areas, you know, bleeding into each other. So after it was painted, after it was dry, I put it in my splat box and I just picked up more of that pink and orange from my palette because I had a lot of it. So I picked it up with a paintbrush and splattered that all over the background because I'm back on the splatter train. Said that again in a recent video. Once I start splattering things, it's gonna last for weeks. Like, everything is getting splattered, whether anyone likes it or not. So I did splatter with the watercolor first, just the pink orange sort of mixture, and then I got to add a bit of shimmer again. So I'm using my Ranger Perfect Pearl powder, and I just put it right on my work surface, mixed it with water, splattered it. It wasn't enough for me, so I added more. So I added more Perfect Pearl powder to my desk, added a bit more water, picked it up with a larger brush. I think I used like a size 6 brush. So I got a ton of splatter. Like, I just splattered this whole background just because I love the shimmer. It's one of those things, especially with the Perfect Pearl powder, that depending on where everything's sitting and where you're sitting, you don't really see anything, but then the light catches it and you can see all that shimmer. So I will show at the end when I tilt, you know, the card back and forth, you can see all the shimmery splatter, and it's just fabulous. So coated this liberally splatter. Shockingly, I don't think I got splatter on myself, which is kind of surprising considering that's usually what happens. But this time I think I was able to keep it more controlled and kept it in the splat box and on my card front. So I let everything dry. Again, you want to make sure it's dry. And then I die cut it with one of Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies. The sentiments, these are not new. I bought these last year sometime. These are by CZ Design. It's the Good Job Mama stamp set. And I pulled it out the other day. I have this little stack beside my desk of just sets and sentiments that I want to use and that just are really fitting for this time. So like encouragement, etc., etc. And I had this one sitting here and I've been wanting to use it. And I was like thinking about, you know, Mother's Day cards, etc. But I was like, what I would want to make more is more just encouragement cards. So I pulled out this set and I inked up the Mama to Mama sentiment with clear embossing ink, and I'm stamping it onto some dull pink cardstock with the clear embossing ink, and then I'm going to coat this with just detail white embossing powder. So once that's coated, I can melt this with my heat tool. And then there is a coordinating wafer die set for the stamp set that I bought at the same time because, again, there's just something about coordinating wafer dies for sentiments that I absolutely love. I never would have thought years ago that I would ever be into that or that it would even be a thing. And now that like kind of all the companies are on board with this and doing it, I love it. Especially ones like this too, that like they don't just die cut like a bubble around it, if that makes sense. Like this one actually like die cuts out a lot of the detail, which I kind of like. So I tape that into place, die cut it, and then to complement this, I'm using one of the new sentiment strips from Simon from the new release. It's called Reverse Mom Days. These are ones that are printed in black on white. So you can just trim them down, stick them on your card, and you're good to go. And you get 2 sheets of each set of sentiments in a pack. So there's 4 pieces altogether with a ton of sentiments. I'll have links to everything like I always do. So I trimmed down a couple of the sentiments that I wanted to add to this card. And then I'm going to set all that aside and I'm going to work on my actual card base. So I still have the background in my MISTI. I'm going to mask off the top portion of my card base here. So I'm just placing some Post-it tape right at the score line. And then I'm going to place this into my MISTI, and then I'm going to actually use that Post-it tape just to hold the card base in place. So making sure everything's lined up. And then I'm just going to ink up this background stamp with Simon's apricot ink. It was just a nice color to kind of go with this, and yet not too intense. Like if I'd use like orange peel or dull pink, it would have been really intense and you wouldn't really be able to write over that. Like this is what I always say, like I just write over this when I write to the recipient of my cards. But with some inks, they're too intense. Like a gel pen, like you really wouldn't be able to read it. So this one was like a nice compromise. So it doesn't need to be perfect. I just like having something on the inside of my cards. So I stamped it with that apricot ink. I'll remove the Post-it tape, and then I'm going to adhere the little sentiment strip to the inside, and it says it's going to be all right. Again, thought it was rather fitting. So adhere that into place, and then I'm going to adhere everything now to my card front. Apologies for the like video getting darker. The sun was like going down and I was so wrapped up in making this I wasn't really paying attention to the lighting. which I tend to do. I also don't pay attention near often enough to whether or not I'm even in camera frame, because, you know, you just get into that groove and you're creating and you're just, with me, I'm not paying attention and looking up and looking at my camera to see what on earth I'm doing. So, anywho, I used my little Doris foam strips to adhere this sentiment and trim some down with my little snips. And then I also used the Doris foam strips to adhere the sentiment strip. So on the front it'll say mama to mama. All great moms have not so great days. Very true. And then, like I said, the inside says it's going to be all right. Also very true. So after I did that, I adhered it to a piece of orange peel cardstock that I cut to slightly larger than the background. I adhered that to my card base. And then as a final little embellishment, I used some of the new Soft Sunrise sequin mix. Just kind of sprinkle those around the sentiments. So just picked out a few of those, and then I'm going to adhere them into place with some craft tacky glue and my embellishment wand. And once those are adhered, this card is complete. So after I was done filming this part, this is when I realized it was dark out and I needed to turn on my overhead lights. So I used those to show the card and the shimmer. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. As always, I will have a link below the video. I'll have a link to the new release. I'll have a link to all the supplies I used. I'll have a link to my blog post. All that info will be in the description box below the video, so you can check that out if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it. I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!